Good morning, our listeners. Unfortunately, I was not able to be here last Wednesday. This morning we're here. My guest is running a little late this morning. My apologies to everyone listening and for our late start. She will be joining me shortly. So when she comes in, of course, I will introduce her and I will tell you a little more about our topic in a bit. Before we begin, I would like to send some shout outs. First off, sending shout out to the Soufre Primi, where they're hosting a career I'm sure right now. Also, shout out to my colleagues, my social workers, colleague who from the Viewfort office, from the Castries office, from Millennium Heights. Shamin Daniel, hope you're listening. And to every listener out there, hoping you have a great day. Okay? This morning, our topic will be about quality education. Okay, and you're wondering, but don't we have quality education in St. Lucia? Yes, we do. Okay, and if we do a little survey, do some research, we'll realize that when children from St. Lucia or the Caribbean go out to study, wherever they go, that most times they do very well. They most times top their class, come out as valedictorians, come out with first class honors, and so on. So, of course, in St. Lucia, we do have quality education. However, however, we realize that, especially here, that our girls are exceeding our boys in our education most of the time, not all the time, most of the time. And we see that there is a slight issue where our education system is geared more for females, because boys, we know, are more practical. Boys are more practical learners. And we still have in the classrooms, most classrooms right now, I would say, are trying to deviate from the chalk and board, but it is still happening right now. And because boys are more practical, their attention span will be very short. If it is that you're just going to do chalk and board with me and read, you will lose me. I will start misbehaving. Okay, as a boy, I will start misbehaving. I will start looking for more fun things to do. Where a girl would sit and read a book, you will find a boy trying to look at a car and find out, how does this work? How did they put that car together? Because, of course, it's more practical. When we look at our Education Act, we know that part of it says the right of a child, that every child deserves an education. It is the right of every child to be at school. Every child deserves an education. Is every child getting an education? That is my question. Is every child getting an education? You may answer me yes. I will be a devil's advocate and tell you no. Because do we cater to the needs of all the students in our classrooms? Do we cater to the needs of all the students that we teach? I would think not. Okay? I am not saying that it is through no fault of a teacher and educator. I am saying that sometimes the resources we have does not lend itself to assisting a child as it should be. Okay? We have different learners. We have different kind of learners. We have auditory learners where they listen and learn. We have kinesthetic learners who feel, who touch, who manipulate. We have visual learners, okay? And some who learn with a combination of learning skills. But if you have this child in your classroom who is somewhat slow, and say you have a class of 20 students, 18 students, and you have these two slow students in your classroom, how do you manage as a teacher? What do you do? When every child in this classroom learns differently, when every child in this classroom needs your attention, how much attention do the children who are slow get? Okay? So these are the things that we are going to look at today. And of course, like I said, when my guest comes in, she's going to give a little more information on quality education. If we look at our curriculum right now, we'll see that this curriculum has been there from maybe a few years ago. Has this curriculum been revised to work with students now? We know that we are living in a technological age. Have we revised this curriculum and brought it up to par to work with the students we have? Our children now are no longer persons like me, or even it's the Erlen here, no longer like us when we were going to school. Okay, they're now more advanced. So teachers have to be ready. Curriculums and resources have to be ready to accommodate these children. But this is why today we are looking at our education system and asking, does it lend itself to working with our children, the children now, the new era we have now? Does this curriculum lend itself to ensuring that the children learn the best way possible? Just recently, I had a special education, somebody who teaches at special education here, a special learner. Of course, she was visually impaired. And if you were listening, you would have heard her say some of the challenges that she encountered. And of course, one of these challenges was she could not have gotten many books in Braille. And this is what she uses to read, okay? And many places you go, you would not get the books in Braille. Do we even have books in Braille in our primary schools? How many primary schools right now, or even secondary schools, have books written in Braille? How many secondary schools or primary schools do we have books with large prints? The majority of times you find the books with very small prints. If a child has issues that she cannot see properly, okay, she's visually impaired, he or she, how do you assist this child? So we have to cater to all our learners, whether they're delayed, whether they have an impairment, whatever the case may be. We have to lend to that learner. So right now we're looking at our resources in our schools. Are these resources relevant? Are they enough? Do they cater to the needs of the children? In our curriculums, what in our curriculums speaks to our slow children? I remembered when I was doing the special ed program, okay? Towards the end, we had somewhat of a curriculum to follow, but nothing really concrete. I'm supposing now with so much time that they now have a curriculum to follow. But before, it was you, the teacher, trying to figure out, following the little skeleton that you have, how do we go ahead and work with our slow students? But as I'm saying right now, I'm sure that things have changed and more resources have been given to our special education teachers so that they could help the special education students in the primary schools a little better. And when we say special education, we mean children who are a bit slow, who are a bit delayed. And we do not say that children have disabilities, we say that they have special abilities. So students who have special abilities, and not only children who are slow, but also children who are more advanced. So you may have a child who is way more advanced than his or her peers. How do you work with this child? If you do not have the sufficient programs or sufficient work for this child, of course this child is going to suffer just as much as a child who is delayed or who is slow. So these are the questions that we have to ask. Moving to moving back to our curriculum, okay? I believe that our curriculum needs to be revised in our schools. Definitely need to be revised in our schools. We need that curriculum to cater more for boys. We need this curriculum to be, it needs to be less exam oriented. Because most times you find everything is on an exam. Does an exam really capture a child's true potential? What if that day I came to write this exam and I was sick? I'm really sick. Or I didn't have breakfast that morning. Or something happened at home that traumatized me. Anything disturbed me. And I'm going to write this exam. Does this exam really show my true potential? Because that day I was disturbed, so I did not give my best. It is not a true reflection of my potential. So I believe that right now, curriculums need to be revised so that at least it's not so exam oriented. We look at research from other countries and we realize that um, in classes like kindergarten, you have pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. In these classes in certain areas of the world, kindergartens don't do exams, okay? They don't write exams, they don't do exams. It's more of a, it's more of a pre-class getting them ready for grade one, where they manipulate items, where they do a lot of play, where they just start learning and being introduced to the work at hand. They're not being given exams and assessed in a sense of, okay, so if you do not get the 70% in grade one, in grade K, sorry, you're not going to move on to grade one because based on the curriculum and the amount of work that you had to do. That's not what it is. If you have to assess, to me, a child who is in grade K, what about we assess the gross motor skills and the fine motor skills? What about we assess, are they holding the pencils correctly and writing correctly? How about we assess that duration of time that child was in grade K? Did he or she seem like they are reading properly? Could they have made the sounds of the letters properly? Could they have heard properly or seen properly? Okay? Could they have related to their peers properly? Yes, you will tell me that our pre-K handles all that. But even some children right now, I don't think right now, if I'm wrong, please correct me, anyone, that it is mandatory that children go to preschool. I'm not sure that this rule has been, that law, sorry, has been passed. So sometimes you find children who are coming to grade K who have never been to school before. They've never been to school before, and this is their first time at a school setting. So we cannot take it for granted that children are coming from a pre-K class or pre-K institution to the grade K class, okay? So right now, we're saying that the curriculum should at least lend itself to more assessments and not so much exams. We go back to the boys. What activities do we really have for our boys? What activities do we have in classes for them to enjoy enjoy the reading? Okay, wanting to enjoy the reading, being able to do their comprehension. Okay, so all these right now, we find that boys don't like reading. So we have to ensure that we work with our curriculum to put enough activities in place that we accommodate our boys especially. So with that, I'm sure that you could see a young lady here.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
again, I did say that I'm going to have a guest, and she she was running a bit late. I did apologize. So she is here with me right now. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
All
the
right.
opportunity to speak. Apologies again for running late.
Not a problem at all. Could you please introduce yourself to us? Give us a little more information about you.
My name is Shade Gustav. I am 19 years old. I am currently serving as the secretary of the UN Youth Advisory Group for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, as well as in some other capacities, but I think that's a capacity I'll be speaking in today, especially with my involvement in plans for advocacy and education on that advisory group. I would say that I am fairly dedicated to youth development and youth advocacy, especially where it concerns bringing to light issues that may not necessarily be spoken about as much as it should be, or spoken about and enough change has not yet been realized. And I think education is one of those areas here in St. Lucia.
Indeed. And I did try to manage in your absence, speaking on quality education. All right. And one of the questions I did ask before you came in, and I tried to answer myself, is what do we mean by quality education? Are we saying that in St. Lucia we don't have quality education?
Okay, I will not go out and say we do not have quality education per se. But I do believe that education is the building blocks of any society. And in order to have a society that is constantly progressing, constantly developing, you need to have a certain type of education. I think when we look at quality education, in order to define it, I think we need to look at how it prepares persons to deal with the society that they're in, right? So does it equip them with the critical thinking skills, the comprehension skills, the knowledge, the understanding, sufficient to the point where they would be able to manage and excel in a given society? So I think when you look at quality education in terms of content, curricular, activities that persons would need to engage in, that is basically what you'd be looking at, the level to which that is achieved in a given system, education system.
All right, well said. Thank you so much. Like I said earlier, you find that with that said, and we could see that in St. Lucia we have our shortcomings.
We do. I think everywhere does, but we do.
Yes, we do have our shortcomings. Persons go out to study. They go to study University of West Indies, wherever. And most times you would find that, speaking of my island, that's what I know, that you'll find many persons come out excelling. You'll find many persons on the honor roll. What
Quite
do you think
often.
of that?
I think that just speaks to our potential as a people. I don't necessarily think that it's because the schools are that good or the programs are that amazing. I think when you look at St. Lucia, you have a lot of persons skilled across multiple areas. We have 2 Nobel laureates, one in economics, one in literature. You have somebody like Julian Alfred, who is excelling in sports. You have Dylan, I don't remember his surname, who was just the first graduate of the Harvard Business School. He's got his graduate degree. So I think that really just speaks to the potential, the intelligence of our people, the potential of our people. And I think it also speaks to where we can go as a nation, so long as we're able to capture that intelligence, capture that ability to be critical in given situations. Because those degrees, my goodness gracious, they're not easier. And they're able to do it and do it extremely well.
Of our resilience
Exactly.
Resilience as a people as well. Well said. Okay. So I was delving into our curriculum. I do not have a set copy, so I like to go on my facts. I'm not sure how far back our curriculum goes, and if it was recently revised. That I do not have that information. But I would think that our curriculum needs to be revised, even if it was recently, I'm not sure. But I'm thinking that our curriculum needs to be revised.
I think I have my own opinions about the curricula we use here. I have my own opinion about that. But I do agree. Like you, I'm not too sure when the last revision was done. However, many of the curricula, the syllabi we use would come from CXE. So a lot of our most recent revisions, so say for example, Form 5, Form 4, would be according to the syllabus set out by CXE, and those are updated regularly, some up to every 5 years. I think, and that's just my personal opinion, that one, we need to update curricula like you were saying. I think in as much as we might try to get persons and say, okay, we've included a tech aspect, we've included some activities that they can do, we included SBAs that can be done. That does not, quite frankly, prepare students for the world that they're going to come into. I think a very, very extremely good example of this is IT at the CSEC level. I remember I didn't do IT in school, but I remember my friends sitting down and writing on a page sheets of code, and I'm like, okay, are you putting it into the computer? Oh no, that's later on. I'm saying, okay, and then they're learning about languages that aren't necessarily up to date. So I think that alone can speak to how lackadaisical our curricula is in keeping up to the times. And not only that, I think one, that it is a bit outdated. I don't think it is as dynamic as it should be. I also don't think it caters to persons fostering critical thinking skills. I think a lot of our curricula encourages students to memorize and regurgitate. I cannot tell you, I remember learning about my sisters in Form 3. And she showed me a note. She's like, Shade, can you help me study? And I'm looking at the thing and I'm saying, I learned this. I cannot apply it today.
I can't remember.
Cannot apply it today. I have a 1 in biology, all A's, but I cannot remember today.
Right.
And to apply it to real life situations, it then becomes difficult because one, not only do I not remember, but two, I didn't learn it in the context in which I would be able to apply it. And I think that should be the foundation of any education system. I don't think it caters to that. I've spoken a lot about curricula. There's one more point though. I do think we need to try our best as a nation to decentralize our curricula from CXE. I think that, and that is my personal opinion, that a lot of the syllabi put forward by CXE, can be very comprehensive, can foster critical thinking skills, given sufficient resources, given if the students are supported properly. But I think that we need to try to imbue in our students more of who we are as St.Lucians. At both the CAPE and CSEC levels, good examples, and I'm not sure what it is for CPEA, I'm not too sure what the history syllabus would look like. But you do Caribbean history, you never hear about the brigands, who the brigands were, and those were revolutionaries here in St. Lucia. You might ask somebody about, I know there's a plant here, you see, I don't even know the name, and I'm here talking. There's a plant that you can use here to brush your teeth. There's so much that you can learn about in St. Lucia, so much that I think could contribute to our cultural identity, and as a result, our development, that so many students here do not know because they're not taught it in schools. And if they're not taught in schools, where are they supposed to learn it? You might say their families, but these people are educated by the same system who taught them nothing.
Exactly. Because as you're saying that, I remembered my son coming home, he wrote CPE, and he's telling me, Mommy, can you believe, I think one of the social studies questions was about a soca artist in the Caribbean, and he's like, why do they ask you about soca artists? I don't know. And the options they had were not latest. The latest ones, I think they had Alison Hines. Yeah, they had Alison Hines, Rihanna, and who again? He said, Mommy, I really do not know. I mean,
The currency.
Like, what's the relevance really
Exactly.
of these questions?
I mean, I could understand maybe what they're trying to do in terms of assessing person's current knowledge about the Caribbean, but something like that, I'm not sure. I don't think that's not current, and honestly too, I don't see the relevance. Speak about maybe the history of soca.
Yes.
You can ask them about the artists. What do they know about where soca came from? Where did it originate? What are the cultural origins? Was it Africans and East?
Options again.
Exactly. No Sly, no Alpha Ale, no Marshall, nobody.
Exactly. So put it as you're saying. Let them relate to the content. And I was just saying before you came that our curriculum is so exam oriented, and you're so correct that when you're doing your work, you're going to prepare for your exam. It is not a thing of learning to be practical. It's a thing of memory, because I want to pass my exam.
Exactly.
Of course, I am going to memorize everything and regurgitate. So afterwards, don't ask me any questions about that. I won't remember for you. So you are so correct. what do you think about, you spoke about the secondary, we go back, I'm going back down to the primary
Mm-hmm.
level. And what do you think about the teaching of boys? What do we see happening with boys right now?
I think now, in as much as we've always spoken about women being oppressed in societies, I don't think that's wrong. But I think now we're seeing a case of male marginalization
Very much so.
here in St. Lucia. Um, I'm not sure if it's a case where it's the teaching strategies that need to be amended, whether or not, because I've heard persons mention that there needs to be an increased male presence in the schools. That might be an issue as well. But I do think we have a serious case of male marginalization. Um, Simple example of that would be the examination scores at all levels. The girls far outperform the boys, and I mean that's typical. But then I think we need to move to start asking ourselves why.
Why?
Is it a case where is that issue at home that's being realized in the school system, the education system? That's why we're seeing it. But I think definitely for sure that is an issue we have here, and it needs to be addressed.
It definitely needs to be addressed because I was thinking that, okay, I would say that boys are more practical than girls. How practical are these curriculums? Okay,
That's very true.
so if you're going to look at reading, how many boys like reading? So how do you get boys to actually?
And now I don't even find it's boys so much. I think it's everybody. If we're looking at the primary school level, there is a reluctance among students to read. Even in my literature class, Miss Severin, if she's listening, hi Miss. She would lament every single class that we were not reading, at least not reading to the extent to which she expected. All right, and that is something you notice at the secondary school levels. Teachers are complaining about it. At the primary school levels, students are not reading. The readers are no longer in school. They used to use it from kindergarten to about grade 2, I believe. I can't remember. I stand to be corrected. But I think we're seeing that issue generally where students don't read. They don't read at home. They don't read at school, and that I think too can be attributed to maybe the lower test scores that we're seeing, the movement away from an attitude of being willing to read. Reading for pleasure, for fun, for knowledge, for everything. Reading can open so many worlds, and all of those worlds are closed off to us now that persons are more reluctant to pick up a book.
Okay. Um, don't you think it's because of the advent of technology? Right now, everybody have their tablets, and instead of reading, they can do the audio.
How many people use audios though? How many students do you know use audios?
I would find that instead of a child picking up a book to read, they can tell you, why read that when you could sit in the cartoons? Why read that when I could just listen to it? You find? So, as you're saying, yes, everything around us right now challenges what we used to learn, what we used to know. So, right now, what really gives to our technological era? How do we assist, and that's for you, how do we assist our children, our youth in this technological era with proper education?
I think proper education begins at home. So you mentioned tablets, you mentioned the use of audiobooks, but what I have found is that persons tend not to use those devices for their personal development. Persons, especially young people, will play games, they might talk to their friends. TikTok, I'm guilty of it. If you see my screen time, some days 9-10 hours, it can be bad. TikTok, Instagram, etc. I think that might be the primary use of technology nowadays as opposed to using it for personal development and for enrichment. I think one thing that saved me was my mom. My mom is an English teacher and she is very much a put on your phone, go and read. I'd read for maybe 2-3 hours a day, and now it's a love of mine. I love to read. So I think that begins at home. Getting parents to understand the importance of reading, what it can do for brain development, for personal development, for the just as a form of emotional regulation, even learning about the world, what that can do for their children, encouraging them to encourage their children to read. I think it needs to be, it's bigger than just person saying, okay, we'll put textbooks online, because there are textbooks online and students still don't read. There are educational videos online and people still don't read. I think that needs to, it's more of a cultural shift that needs to happen. We need to, as a society, look at the fact that, hey, Reading is important. A lot of the knowledge that we need to find out, that we need to know, is in books and in articles, things that you might not necessarily get in a video or get in a cartoon or get into a game, and follow that and really begin to start looking into how we can get persons to encourage others to read, especially children, train them while they're young.
Very well said. And some time ago, I did lament on the fact that children learn by example.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to model behavior. How many times did you see your mom read?
My mother is an English teacher, but every day.
Exactly. So because she's reading, she encourages you to
Mm-hmm.
read, she would read. So like I say, if you pick up a book, parents, of course, you ask your child to go and read, but you're on your phone. You're playing, doing TikTok, doing whatever on your phone. Okay? No, you're asking me to go and read and you're on your phone.
That's the children do emulate,
I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling you very much so. So if I pick up a book and I tell my child, come let's read, I'm modeling the behavior. So of course they would follow me. They would pick up a book and
Mhm.
read. All right? Very well said. To the youth, what do you think could be done? What do you think are some of the programs that could be implemented in schools to assist with better learning or better grades?
Something that I have found to be very effective to help students learn about things is debating. I know some people have tried it. Tried to start reading clubs, literacy groups where they read books and they come and they discuss it. But quite frankly, I think with the attitude of a lot of persons today, that might not necessarily be as successful. Not saying debating would be, but again, I'm a debater, so I can speak to the fact that when you have to prepare for a debate, you're reading everything, Tom, Dick, Jack, Harry, everything everybody has to say about a topic so that you can come with your own views, your own opinions. And not only does that encourage students to read, it would also encourage them to be critical, to understand information, to be wary of information from sites that are maybe not as credible as others, looking to be the best version of themselves ready. Because when you get on that stage and you're speaking as a representation of not only the organization of your country, but yourself. So I think debating is one thing for sure. I think too, like you were saying, emulating, I think it's very important that maybe not a reading period, but some class time be dedicated to encouraging that sort of critical discussion. Maybe not reading per se, in as much as it's important, but that critical discussion needed to say, okay, we're studying, say, chemistry today in class. What are the practical applications? How can that assist you in daily life? And begin those discussions. I don't think that happens to the extent to which it needs to happen in school. Now, I'm saying that, and then you might speak to a teacher, and the teacher would say that students will not. Students cannot. Well, not cannot, but will not. The attitude of many students might not necessarily be one that is favorable towards that approach. But I do think we need to try. Also speaking with parents, I think that's the other part of it too. But debating for sure and dedicating school time towards engaging that sort of discussion.
I totally agree with you, because you look at other cultures, you look at other countries, and children can carry out a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But in St. Lucia, you listen to interviews of star athletes and star performers, and you'd ask them, how was the show, or how was your performance? It was nice. It was okay. And this is what you get. They cannot carry out a conversation. They cannot explain themselves. So I do believe that this is an awesome point, Miss, that they need to introduce debating and explaining, like you were saying, in the different subjects in the schools. So that would encourage students to be able to communicate more effectively. That's one thing I've always found,
Mhm.
especially in the primary school level. Because if you're going to start off, don't start off in the secondary school.
Mm-hmm.
Start off in the primary school, where you always have a presentation and you explain your presentation. to
I
your
think that's
grades.
important. Even when it comes to something like encouraging students, you have a group presentation, but come with points. Speak extempo.
Exactly.
Speak, well, maybe not impromptu, but try to speak extempo. Don't read when you come to present. And I think in addition to debating and that kind of thing, another thing that I found helps a lot amongst students is encouraging them to represent. So you find a lot of the youth leaders, they tend to be very well spoken. Those who have served on students' councils, on executives of clubs, who have You mentioned athletes, but there are quite a few athletes actually who, because of their engagement in sports, having done interviews, having gone to the schools that they've gone to on scholarship, etc., are very well spoken, are very critical. So I think if we as a country say we don't implement debating clubs, say we don't implement reading periods or periods that would encourage critical thinking in a sense, I think we should try to, at the very least, encourage youth representation, students' councils, clubs, the rank prefect bodies, have them do presentations, have them speak to their classes. And I think if we do all three of those together, some change can happen. But at the very least, I think encouraging youth to speak and not be quiet, be marginalized, be sidelined, be everything that happens, just take it. I think that would help a lot as well.
Do you think this happens? Like you?
I think that we do have a lot of youth representation in St. Lucia. I think, especially with the different district youth and sports councils, that there is representation there. With the National Youth Council, there is representation there. At quite a few secondary schools, we have councils. That's me being diplomatic. So I think we should expand. I know there was a drive recently to get students' councils at the primary school level, and I think that should be pushed as well. The younger you can get them to talk, the better. The younger you can get them to critically assess their situation, critique it, and then recommend solutions, recommend things that can be done to ameliorate those situations. I think that would be good. And also advocating on behalf of others, I think that would be great as well. I think too, something as simple as, and something that a personal gripe of mine has been National Students' Council. That was one of the forums where students would come together, discuss issues affecting students, engage with material from other countries to support recommendations that they would be doing to get precedent. And I don't think since COVID that a new council has been elected. So I think that too might assist. But I really do think we need to work with the youth to engage them to read, to critically apply what they're learning, but also to critically apply what they're learning to better themselves and others.
Awesome, great points. I remember I was a teacher before. I taught for a number of years. And I remembered one thing that really got my students' attention. When I wanted them to do some work, I created the atmosphere of a competition. I had them competing against each other, and let me tell you, these students would go all out. So you were so correct when you said to give them the chance to explain themselves, speak to. But what groups or clubs do you think that can be implemented in the schools to assist with better education?
Better education, one, debating. Like I said earlier, debating for sure. Any kind of club that involves representation, so youth councils, student councils, that sort of thing, for sure. I think two, Toastmasters, if we could look at the models that they have and see if we could allow students to maybe in a class period or form a club around it, I think that'd be great as well.
Give us a little more information on Toastmasters.
Toastmasters is a club that basically encourages you to public speak. So all that thing about you shy and you cannot talk and you cannot enunciate, that goes. They work with you to ensure that you become a better public speaker. And I think that is one of the deficiencies that we have in our education system today, where students cannot present, students cannot speak. You speak with them sometimes and their thoughts are disordered. You see it in the essays that they write for English. So I think that might assist them there as well as debating in that regard. In addition to those, I think too, we can also utilize the clubs that are existing. So sport clubs, for example, on a Saturday, bring them out. Have them engage in an activity that's not necessarily sports related, more focused on team building, for example, coordination, cooperation. And I don't think it should necessarily be a case where we're focusing on what can be used to better the education system, what can be implemented. Because we do have a lot of clubs in the schools. You have Girl Guides, you have Red Cross, not a lot. Girl Guides, Red Cross, the likes. I think we should try to utilize those clubs, existing clubs, as much as possible to introduce new information. Red Cross, great example. You do get to do CPR training, you get to do trainings in ID, disaster risk reduction, management, mitigation. Other clubs like Youth Emergency Action Committees, YAC St. Lucia, great for that as well. I'm not sure if they're still up or coming back, but another great group for that as well. You get trainings, you get certified in those things, and that in itself opens new opportunities. You get to learn, well, really truly apply what you've learned at school in practical situations. In those cases, disaster risk reduction and management. So my 2 cents on some clubs that can be implemented.
Great, awesome. And a lot of these clubs would be for the secondary schools.
Secondary schools, but you can adapt them to primary schools.
Primary schools.
Camille Henry, for example, Girl Guides, Brownies, Red Cross. They might not necessarily be able to do the full-fledged Toastmasters program, but something can be created along those lines for them to start fostering that leadership, that ability to speak and critically think.
All right. What do you think of having, for example, a maths club and a language club and a social studies club? I'm asking that because where you find you don't just, okay, it won't be a club where you come and do sums, where you just come and do, it would be a club where, and again of the competition, so you could say that numeracy month is coming up, or literacy month is coming up. So we're going to have some games, you're going to have some competitions. So your maths club would be responsible for developing a new strategy to teach algebra, or a maths club having to create something where, you know, a game where the children could do subtraction better. What do you think of such clubs?
Honestly, I think those are great ideas. I think it stands to provide students with a great opportunity to take what they're learning, process it, understand it, comprehend it, and then apply it in their everyday life. And I think too that would make, if especially it's adapted, those clubs are implemented to fit the syllabi that we use, the curricula that we use. I think, my goodness, they would be by far much more applicable because they're taking the information that they're learning and putting it in situations where they can actually comprehend, understand, and apply. I think the only thing there might be interest. That's usually the issue you find with a lot of these groups.
Yeah.
But so long as you use a strategy that is appealing to students, so like you were saying, trying your best not to make it, too, don't use a classroom style too much, right? Make it a bit, exactly. And also include incentives. So for example, letting students know what they're learning, letting students compete amongst different schools. That's an incentive for some students. For some students, it might be a case where they're looking for time. They have time. Their parents pick them. I'll use myself as an example. My father used to pick me up from school 5:30 sometimes. I had 2.5 hours in the school doing nothing. So time that they can use valuably while they're at the school. I think it just depends on how we appeal to students, and those would be perfect to implement in schools.
Awesome, because we do have the science fairs. So with the sciences, we can also have maths fairs. Let's make it something of not only science. Yes, we could say that science and maths could be put into each other, but let's not say science, let's say maths. To get more children interested in the mathematics, let's do a language-based fair. So everybody, like you're saying, they do something, get involved, put it out there, make it more practical to help with our learning. All right, I'm hoping that a lot of our teachers are listening.
I'm hoping.
So,
depending on what they see, we'll see whether or not they like the feedback we're giving.
Okay. So how was your experience at school?
My experience at school, I cannot speak too poorly on my experience. I went to the Camille Henry Memorial School. Good 7 years there. Some of my greatest role models today came from that school. Then I went to the St. Joseph's Convent, another great school, and I think going there afforded me many, 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 many opportunities that I'm extremely grateful for up to a day like today. People like my counselor, Mrs. Paul, my past principal, Sister Rufina, my former homeroom teacher, Mrs. Charles, those people really have shaped the person that I am today, and I'll be forever grateful for them. And at Arthur, It was definitely an experience. There were many ups, many downs. I served as the president of the Students' Council while I was there for one term. Um, so yeah, I think my experience was good. But I think throughout my time at the school, I would have noticed that you had students. I mean, I did okay. My grades were okay. So it wasn't really an issue for me. But there were students who fell by the wayside. They didn't understand the material, they didn't know how to apply it. And sometimes very simple application questions would come up and people would struggle with it. They would try to engage with it and they couldn't. And I don't put fault on them. I don't give them fault at all, just because of how lacking in many senses our education system is in fostering that level of critical thinking. And as I'm speaking about that, it made me realize something that I wanted to bring up today, is that I don't think that we engage our students who are not necessarily, I don't want to say academically inclined to say that they cannot excel in academics, but who have a passion more so for the more technical subjects. I know that we have our TVET schools now. I know that they have specified curricula that they follow there. But honestly, when I look at how we approach education and ensuring that education is inclusive and effective now, I think that as opposed to maybe having TVET schools, maybe one focusing on cooking, etc., that we maybe should as a nation look to investing in the existing institutions. So we have great school, Castries Comprehensive Secondary School, investing in the infrastructure. There's Sufra Comprehensive, Viewfort Comprehensive. There's another school, Chozel Secondary is another great one. Investing in the infrastructure there and allowing students the opportunity to know that, hey, you can go, so you want to go to Castries Comprehensive, you want to go to whatever school you want to go to, the infrastructure for you to excel within whatever area you so desire. I mean, there might be schools better for other things, but the area that you want to excel in, you can work towards it there. I don't think that it necessarily fosters a level of inclusion. I think if we're trying to integrate TVET education into our curricula, I don't think we should separate those students. I think we can provide the human resource, we can invest in the infrastructure at the existing schools to ensure that inclusion is achieved, to ensure that we continue teaching. And okay, so I went to convent and we don't have an auto mechanics block, right? Say, they might not do it, but say they were to put one, right? I might be more inclined to do biology, chemistry, physics, but I still have the opportunity to learn. I don't need to go to another secondary school to maybe do lessons or to do something to that effect. I think we should try to integrate TVET education into our curricula and not necessarily separate those students, those institutions from the existing ones.
And I totally agree. I'm sure you've heard before that full inclusion was being spoken about.
Mm-hmm.
At some points, I think some years ago, they had full inclusion. And what they were really trying to do, as you're saying, that children who are less academically inclined, they were looking at leaving them in the schools, but making it more maybe user friendly, like you were saying. And so instead of having like a special education school, have every child in the same school. Yes, it's a great idea. It is. However, we need a lot of training. We need the resources. We need everything. And I totally agree with you. Because if you look back, I don't know if you could remember, there was this, they called it technical school in Viewfort.
Yeah.
What happened to it? Okay, there you go. So stigma is attached to certain schools. All right, it will be like, oh, they had heads on the decks, and so the stigma is attached to these schools, and you find more and more students drop out. They don't go there because of how the school is labeled. But if it is included, full inclusivity.
Exactly. And I think,
okay,
like you're saying, if we take schools that I think even the TVET schools carry a certain level of stigma, just because of the fact that we see that people who are not differently inclined, that sounds wrong, but people who are more inclined towards the more practical subjects
right,
are less intelligent or less capable of students who are more academically inclined. So I think that the stigma for me is one of the biggest things, ensuring that persons feel okay to go to the schools, do not face any kind of stigma, are not labeled and fall subject to the mental repercussions of being labeled,
Yes.
accepting that label and going on with it as being true. So definitely, I think that's something that we should look towards. And I think that has always been our greatest issue, ensuring that we provide teachers and students with the proper training, providing training to the leadership of the school so that they know how to manage the the demographics within the schools based on the students they accept. Also looking at at the level of the ministry, what training, what resources are needed so that the ministry can support those initiatives. It might be it will be expensive, but I think if we want to move towards an an equitable society, a society where persons can aspire and attain with minimal stigma attached to what it is they want to do, I think that'd be great as well.
Awesome. And something as you were saying, I'm thinking that a lot of our, say, policymakers, some of them, curriculum officers and so on, how many times do these persons in position really come down on the ground?
That's something. I'm not a teacher, so I will not speak. I'll not speak personally, but that is something that I've heard. That you find a lot of the times there is a disconnect between the realities on the ground and the policy decisions made to address them. And when those decisions are made, sometimes it is to meet issues of the past. So we're in 2025. Today, a policy decision might address something in 2020, for example. So I think that is definitely something as a society we need to push for, ensuring that our leaders, especially within the sector of education, something as important as ensuring that our young people are educated, are able to go down. There's regular checking, there's a feedback mechanism that works faster than the one that's currently being used.
Definitely. So going back to that, leaders, persons in authority, if you're listening, of course it would be good to go on the ground. Find out from the teachers, find out from the students, find out from the principals what holds, what obtains, what do you need. Don't just stay in your office, carry out a survey that holds from Jamaica and Dominica and Cuba and come and implement it in St. Lucia, where when it's implemented, of course, we are all struggling and we don't have the resources for it.
And I think too, speaking of studies, I think one thing that we can try to focus on more here, especially within education, is monitoring and evaluation. Sometimes you have policies implemented, sometimes you have legislation that's passed and it's affecting students, it's affecting teachers, but short term, through all terms, there is no checking on how it is impacting students, impacting teachers, impacting leadership, and how that can be improved. So I think if we were to also ensure that we have proper monitoring and evaluation mechanisms, so like you were saying, surveys, interviews, focus groups, seeing not just before it's implemented, but letting that carry through at least 5 years down the line, seeing how that has impacted students, what needs to change, what can be amended, what needs to happen in order for the policies, for the measures, for whatever it is, to be as effective as possible.
Most definitely. And as you were saying about evaluating and assessing, I know right now, I'm not sure what program is used for children's grades, especially in the secondary school. I'm not sure if you can assist me with that. But I'm realizing that most times in certain schools that you find a lot of errors happening on children's record sheets. That, for example, you wrote an exam, you got a 90%, on your exam sheet would have a 60, or would have you absent, or would have a 0. Can you speak of that in terms of how whatever is used at secondary schools?
To my knowledge, the system used for grading isn't standardized. That's to my knowledge, but again, I stand to be corrected. Beyond CSEC, CAPE, CP, I do not think that the grading mechanisms are standardized. In instances where you have wrong grades, etc., I think that might speak primarily to the fact that many teachers here in St. Lucia are overworked to the point where a lot of these errors may happen. I'm not saying that they should. I do not think that they should happen. I think that's something that we definitely need to work to ensure doesn't happen as much as possible. But I do think that we have a lot of teachers who often have to put in these grades manually, who often have to go in and mark these papers for classes of 30 something, and sometimes you're a secondary school teacher, you have 3, 4, 5 classes to mark. So I do think those errors happen, especially because we have a limited not a limited number of teachers to grade and put in marks, and sometimes the deadline given for the number of classes, for the number of papers, can be a little short. So I think probably one, ensuring that teachers are trained in the mechanisms that the schools use. So if it's Google Sheets, ensuring how a basic session on how to use Google Sheets. I know some schools use OpenSys, so that's something else. Training in how to use OpenSys, how to avoid errors. And I think so long as we address that, I don't necessarily think that it is such a wide-scale issue just because of the lack of standardization. But I think it's important that we look towards training teachers in the different systems, different mechanisms, the different platforms, and ensuring that too, when that kind of blame is being placed, that we also look at the burdens that our teachers have on them. They don't have that many resources, and a lot of them truthfully don't have a lot of time. So ensuring that we're understanding, but also ensure that we check up on those things.
Do you think that it would help if schools, especially secondary schools, I mean, with the primary school it's a little different, but especially secondary schools, do you think it would help if there is like a staff put in place for putting in the grades, like a technical staff?
I think it would help. Honestly, I think it would help. I think most schools, I'm speaking for most, do have a technical person that would be responsible, but a technical person is responsible for three. Exactly. So I think it's important to at least lower the burden in cases where you have students' grades being put in. Maybe cross-reference, double check, make sure that the grades are, once you submit a grade, say on for a system, that when you're putting it on the grade sheet, you're putting in your comments that it matches, right? Stuff like that. But I do think that would assist a lot. Again, a lot of teachers overworked, and I think that would help with the burden a lot, quite a bit.
Because just as you have the ministries have the IT staff, so just as the schools would have the IT personnel doing all that, doing the grading, the records and so on, I think it would really help.
It would.
As you said, yes, teachers are overbooked.
Boy, and underpaid too, but that's for a different show.
For true, it is true. I was a teacher, like I said. So, all right. So we have Adela Bowers watching and listening from Bigger to Fancy St. Vincent. All right. Shout out to you. Thank you for joining us from St. Vincent. Okay. And of course, we're having a very informative program, and I could not have asked for a better guest. Okay, so she made up for her time, indeed. Awesome. So we have almost basically come to an end. Do you have any closing remarks?
Oh, yes. I think as a people, we need to place greater emphasis on education, fostering education, meaningful education amongst our young people. I am very, very worried for where we might end up. I remember reading recently an article from the World Bank that basically it critiqued the Caribbean, not just ST.LUCIA, but the Caribbean, saying that there is an education crisis impending because of the lack, not because of, but I'm inferring because of the lack of critical thinking, comprehension that is fostered within our students. I think as a nation, we need to wake up, start looking at how we can really get our students to be critical, to be the dynamic persons that we would need to lead us throughout the next 10, 15, 20 years, 100 years down the line. But yes, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It really was a pleasure. And yeah, that's it from me.
Okay, great. You were speaking and I was not even thinking of ending. I was thinking of a question. Of course, time is against us. But I'm just thinking that it would have been awesome, again, from saying that don't just stay in your offices and do stuff, come down on the ground. So I'm even thinking that the youth persons, like if we have our national
Students' Council, we don't have that right now.
Okay,
youth councils, district councils.
That when the curriculum is being revised, when policies are being made, invite a representative to come on board.
They are invited. In a lot of instances, they are invited. But I think, again, monitoring and evaluation, how has this been received? What have been the impacts? How can we amend? How can we change? I think when it does happen, it happens too late. So I think that's something we should work on as well.
Awesome. I'm happy that I did ask. So, great. So every time I have such enriching programs, I want to have a part two. So
Well, if you're ready, just call me. And I know
De-
which bus to take this time. So I'll be here on time.
most definitely. Thank you so very much, Miss Gustav. I must say I learned a lot myself, and thank you for being here. Of course, you will be back, okay? And thank you, listeners, for having us. Again, I'm appealing to persons for more comments, more calls. I know that the time of day, maybe not, it will not lend itself to that because everybody's at work. So maybe then we can have a discussion with 88.5 Suffer FM for our time. So with that, thank you so much. All right.
Or repeat broadcast?
And a repeat broadcast, definitely.
Possibly.
Yes.